Good morning. We're going to catch another sunrise together, and I'm going to continue with our chapter 6. This section is called Seeing Only Love. I am out at a public park here, so there's plenty of people walking, talking, and doing stuff. So at any time, we're going to see and hear people today. Seeing only love. For some, it is too painful and too risky to love in the shadow of loss. Yet their desire for love is overwhelming. These individuals refuse to see or be daunted by loss. They see only the love because they want to believe in the power and the triumph of loving relationships. As children, left by parents they loved or had not yet had a chance to know, they imagined a romantic rendition of what love looks like. Holly's mother was widowed after only 3 years of marriage. Her war hero husband I'm sorry, that was a giant stick hitting the top of the car. Her war hero husband left her with 2 small daughters and a series of fantasies about what might have been. As Holly grew up, she remembers she heard stories about her larger-than-life father, a handsome, dashing man who was killed while fighting for his country and returned home a hero in a draped casket. Holly's mother told her that love was something magical and special, and that a woman only gave her heart once. Not surprisingly, Holly's mother never remarried and lived with the fantasies of her lost husband. When Holly went off to college and began dating, she took with her her mother's romantic notions of what relationships and marriage were like. She fell in love with a young man, and believing her mother's story that one only falls in love once, she assumed, of course, that she would marry this man. After dating for a few months, he left town and did not contact her for almost a year. Holly remained convinced, however, that he would return and marry her. He was, after all, her one chance at love. Holly's story ended up more happily than her mother's, and in fact, her absent suitor did return, and they were eventually married. Even when she and her boyfriend were separated, however, and he failed to answer her letters, Holly refused to see the possibilities of loss. Love and loss would not dance together in her life. She was convinced. Paradoxically, many of those whose lives were marked by an absence of any affection or emotional warmth after the death of a parent became the most ardent believers in the power of love. One man whose mother died when he was 7 recalls going to his father one night, upset and lonely. He sat on his father's bed and said, "Dad, I miss Mom." His father, a hardened and critical man, turned to him and said, "Too bad. Life is hard and you'd better get used to it." Another man whose mother died when he was 10 recalls the barren landscape that became his home after his mother's unexpected death. There were no hugs, no kisses, nothing like that at all. It was just all gone. Despite their early experiences, or perhaps because of them, these 2 men grew up with a naive faith that love would heal the wounds of childhood. Given the absence of affection after one parent died, It might have been necessary for these individuals to continue to believe in the enduring quality of love. It is one thing to feel that love has left temporarily. It is another to believe that love is gone from one's life forever. These young boys may well have needed to continue their faith in the power of love in order to survive in a world that was temporarily loveless. Many children, after their early loss, envisioned themselves to be like fairy tale characters, temporarily frozen into sleep or asleep. Snow White lies in a glass coffin, not alive, not dead, waiting for the love of her prince to awaken her. These survivors of early loss similarly believe that despite their temporary sleep, they would eventually be awakened into a world of love and happiness. Each of the individuals I interviewed who held to a belief in the omnipotence of love married quickly after a short courtship when they were still quite young. All of these people continued to be married to the man or woman who had captured their heart a long time ago. One might have predicted that given the naivete with which they entered marriage and the generally high rate of divorce, these individuals might have had troubled marriages that failed to last. Yet for each of them, the bond between love and loss had been permanently sundered. Once they were committed to loving someone, each of them banished loss from the house. They refused even to consider the possibility of untimely death, and they would never willingly end a relationship through separation or divorce. These individuals boast marriages that have lasted anywhere from 10 to 40 years, and each spoke to me of his or her marriage in idyllic terms. One man said, "My dreams for my marriage have come true, and they have been absolutely what I dreamed. My marriage is the only place in my life where I have achieved my dream world in a reality that was as good, if not better, than the dream." There's the sun. Many of these individuals were looking not only for a spouse and a companion, but for a soulmate, someone who would be able to understand the pain they had been through and to connect with the hurt child that lay within. One man whose home became abusive and chaotic after his father's death went off to college knowing, "I needed and wanted somebody." Within weeks of meeting his future wife, a student at a college 500 miles away, he knew that he had met someone he could love. We were both lonely people, but self-reliant on the outside. Within a short time of their meeting, he took her home to see his family. It was important that she know firsthand the chaos from which he had come. Unlike many adolescent love affairs, his relationship with his future wife was motivated, in part, by a desperate desire to be with someone who would finally see and acknowledge his pain. Although he was unable to articulate it at the time, he wanted to make sure that she knew exactly what she was getting into before he fell in love with her. He did not want to risk loving someone who might decide to leave him when she learned some secret about his past later in their relationship. After their first summer together, he knew that he wanted to marry this young woman. However, they were both freshmen in college, and marriage seemed an impossibility. During the next year, he spent many hours and long weekends hitchhiking to see the one woman he felt could understand and care for him. Their relationship alternated between intense weekends together and periods of painful separation. Loss and love were too connected for him to feel safe, and after the first year, he insisted that she make a choice. He was ready for a commitment, and he wanted a similar promise from her. When she agreed, he was elated, feeling at last, "My life is my own. I'm finally away from the nightmare." After almost 15 years of marriage, he reports, "It feels like we are one in everything we do." Herb reports feeling so lonely that he came to think of himself as a majority of one before he met his wife. After his mother died, Herb's father withdrew into his work and a time-consuming second marriage. Herb felt alone, without an advocate or a friend. "If I ever needed to make my case, I knew I'd have to make it on my own." From the time he began to date, Herb always wanted to make relationships into more than what they were. He knew that he was searching, not only for a date, but for a special friend, someone who would care about him and love him. When he drove off to college in the family car, his only gift from his withholding and stingy father, Herb felt relieved but alone. He spent most of his college years studying, working, and looking for someone to love. Shortly after he graduated from college, Herb met a young woman, herself from an abusive and chaotic family, and within 2 months he knew he wanted to marry her. She had problems of her own, so she was able to understand my problems. It made us closer. She was also warm, fun, and as Herb says, very much alive. Following his mother's death, all vitality and joy had fled from Herb's existence, and he sought in a wife a woman who would make him feel alive and loved. Throughout their long marriage, Herb has most enjoyed watching his wife mother their 3 children. She is an engaged and compassionate mother, and he especially likes the fact that she will take the side of one of her children against him in a disagreement. Even though he himself may be on the losing side of an argument, he loves to see a mother who supports her children. For some individuals, this search for all-powerful love can feel almost desperate. The individual believes that not only happiness, but survival itself depends on finding the needed partner. For these individuals, it becomes unthinkable to consider that love once found might be lost. Tone it down just a little. With the sun in my eyes, it looks like it's clear. Beautiful leaves keep falling. All right, Scott's story. Excuse me. Since Scott's mother was not only loving, but also very beautiful, it was easy to transform her into a fairy princess when she died quite suddenly when he was 10. Scott remembers as a child watching his very glamorous mother dress up to go out with his father. "She seemed so perfect. I guess she'll always be young and perfect in my memory." For many months after her death, Scott would dream about his mother every night. The dreams were of life as it had been before she died. He would close his eyes and be transported back in time to the wonderful everyday life he had shared with his mother. He much preferred dream time to daytime. At night, he was a loved and cared for child. During the day, he was a lonely orphan. I always knew that my mother loved me a lot. I kept that thought with me when I felt like I needed comforting. Scott's father was overwhelmed by the task of raising 3 young children. For the first year after his wife's death, he brought in a series of housekeepers, none very competent, some clearly too young and inexperienced to provide the mature love and caring his children needed. Within a year, Scott's father remarried. His new wife was devoted to him and to her own 2 children, but not at all interested in Scott and his siblings. After his stepmother appeared, Scott's own mother was never mentioned. It was as if she vanished. There were no pictures, not a word. I was not even allowed to have my memories. It was all just buried for years. While Scott's stepmother surely did not invite him to become a son to her, he is unsure he would have agreed under any circumstances. Everybody has only one mother. Part of me died when my own mother died. I felt more like a boarder in my father's house than like a son. As soon as he became a teenager, Scott remembers he thought that if only he had a girlfriend, he would have someone he could love forever. Although most adolescent boys want to date as many girls as they can, Scott was searching for a wife. He wanted to find someone whom he could love and who could love him. During much of his high school, he found himself to be out of sync with his peers. He was too serious for many of the girls he dated, who themselves wanted only casual romance, none being ready to commit to a lifelong relationship. Scott worried that he was too desperate, too clingy, and too needy, and that no one would ever love him. He remembers a friend of his in high school saying to him, "Scott, you will probably marry the first girl who loves you back." When it was time for Scott to go to college, his family decided that Scott would attend the same elite, small, all-male college that had been his father's alma mater. For a boy intent on finding a wife, nothing could have been worse. For 4 years, Scott was miserable. Dating was difficult, and when he did meet someone he liked, he had to contend with a week-long separation between dates. Although many of his classmates complained about the lack of women on campus, for Scott, the lack of someone to care about felt like a desperate circumstance. He needed someone to love, and most importantly, he needed to know that someone loved him. He left college wondering if he was an unlovable person, someone no one would even want to marry. When he was 22, Scott met the woman who was to become his wife. He liked the way she looked instantly, but more importantly, he liked the fact that she responded to him. Within 2 months, he knew that he wanted to marry her. His fears that she had some terrible flaw that would drive all women away from, his fears that he had some terrible flaw that would drive all women away from him began to disappear as this woman repeatedly assured him that she cared for him and wanted to be his wife. In 10 years of marriage, he and his wife have never spent a night apart. Scott describes them as a totally devoted couple. He cannot imagine anyone with whom he would rather spend time. This is not to say that Scott and his wife do not have independent interests. Each is an active professional. Both have friends and both participate in a variety of sports and hobbies. Yet each is clear that the other is the center of his or her life. Our need for closeness is so strong that neither of us can hide it. In his wife, Scott has finally found someone he feels comfortable and safe enough to love. I am completely dependent on her for love. What is strange, though, is that I depend on her for nothing else. For the rest of his needs, Scott has learned how to be a quite competent provider. He knows how to take care of himself financially and intellectually. He knows how to cook and clean and to run a household. Yet he refuses even to imagine what his life would be like if his wife were ever taken away. He will not allow loss to enter the loving world he has created. Jenny's story. And that'll be the end of this section. Like Scott, Jenny knew that she would fully recover from her father's death, only if she found someone to love. Jenny's father's death, when she was only 10 years old, took her totally by surprise. He was a healthy, vigorous man who died in a hunting accident. In the morning, he kissed her goodbye, walked out the door, and by afternoon he was dead. Jenny never got to say goodbye to her father, never had the chance to touch or hug him again. As an only child and a pretty little girl, Jenny had enjoyed a special relationship with her father. He would take her riding and hunting with him. They would play together, and Jenny would share her secrets and her dreams for the future with her father. After her father died, Jenny kept him alive in her own mind for many years. As an only child, she had been accustomed to having imaginary playmates, made-up characters who would keep her company when her parents were busy or away. It was an easy step for Jenny to turn her father into one of these make-believe playmates. She would have long conversations with her father inside her head, telling him about her life, continuing to share her secrets and her dreams. Paradoxically, Jenny feels as if she stayed closer to her dead father than she was to her living mother. Yet a part of Jenny shut down after her father died. She built a wall around herself, fearing ever getting too close to anyone or ever loving anybody as much as she had loved him. Jenny knew that in order to fully heal from her loss, she would need to risk loving again, but she could not imagine how that might happen. While she was at college, Jenny met a man who had also lost his mother when he was a boy. The two felt instantly connected. Each understood the other's most secret and painful memory. Despite her immediate attraction to this man, Jenny also felt cautious and frightened. Could she take the chance of loving someone again? The two dated for almost a year before they decided to marry. A wedding was planned, and Jenny remembers the afternoon she and her fiancé went out in search of an apartment where they might live after the marriage. She came home from her afternoon out with her boyfriend, feeling more depressed than she had in years. Jenny went into the bathroom and took a whole bottle of pills. She remembers that she did not want to die. She only wanted help. She was too scared of another loss to commit to her fiancé, yet equally frightened of losing him, the only man she had loved since her father. Jenny's suicide attempt enabled her to get the help she needed. She spent 6 months working. Okay, little spider. No. Sorry, tiny spiders are coming in from the tree, and now he thinks he lives here. Quit making a home, buddy. Okay, sorry about that. She spent 6 months working with a psychotherapist or a therapist who helped her to deal not only with her fears of intimacy, but with her need finally to relinquish her special relationship with her dead father in order to commit fully to a relationship with a living man. I was desperate to be able to fall fully in love. I knew that a wall needed to come down. Jenny's fiancé stood by her throughout her therapy, a sign of commitment and devotion, which allowed Jenny to feel more secure in her choice of this man as a life mate. When she was in her mid-30s, the mother of 4 and a happily married woman, Jenny's husband suffered a mild heart attack. She remembers being panicked. It was as if the past was doomed to repeat. Jenny would be widowed like her mother, and once again she would feel devastated by the loss of the man she loved. The story had a different ending this time. Jenny's husband survived his heart attack, and she gained a newfound confidence in her own ability to survive unexpected and tragic events. Jenny and her husband have now been married for almost 40 years, and she sees herself as living proof of the healing power of love. And that is the end of that little portion. We are on page 159. This is the book, The Loss That Is Forever, written by Maxine Harris, PhD. This chapter is Building Relationships, the Dance of Love and Loss. The next section is called Seeing Only Loss, as this part was called Seeing Only Love. I hope you enjoyed the sunrise. I appreciate you being with me and listening. Thank you.